So we are in part 3 of a 6-part series called The 3 I's of EQ. Identify, illustrate, and implement. Sounds funny. First 5 parts, we're actually going in all the identify. We're going to hit each of these 5 components of emotional intelligence. And then the last one, we're going to wrap it up with illustrating a few simple things to make it easier for you to wrap your head around and how to put it into practice. And we're going to hit the implement part and really talk about how to put this into use in your own life and in your organization. Mm-hmm. So the very first one we did, we talked about self-awareness. Now, what we're talking basically on emotional intelligence based on a model from Daniel Goleman. And Dr. Goleman is fantastic work, seminal work on emotional intelligence. He really popularized the concept in the 90s. Highly recommend his book called Emotional Intelligence, or the book Working with Emotional Intelligence from him. Great one. Now, the difference is his model is basically 4 different pieces of emotional intelligence. The assessment tool that we use is loosely based on his model that a couple other professors and scholars have worked in, also puts in an area called motivation. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Our first part of this, we talked about self-awareness. And that's where it all starts. You cannot be emotionally intelligent without being aware of your emotions, your emotional reaction to things, and how it affects you. And honestly, that's the biggest part of it. That's where it all starts. You have to be aware of it. If you're not aware of it, you're just going to react automatically, and you're not even going to know how you come across. Great book. Second book recommendation is from Dr. Marshall Goldsmith. It's a book called Triggers. Love the book. And what really gets me about that is the example he uses. The whole premise of the book is this. Instead of just an emotion and an automatic reaction, if you can become self-aware when something triggers your emotions, that self-awareness gives you that split second of cognitive ability to where your prefrontal cortex, your cognitive mind, your decision-making capabilities can step in and actually do something about it. So it's not an automatic response. Somebody says something, you automatically get angry. You got that split second. You can actually decide what you're going to do. And that kind of goes into the second part. That high level of self-awareness goes into self-regulation.
Right. And Dave, that's the key for our listeners to understand. So if we fail to regulate our emotions, it becomes very difficult to stay focused and on task. So self-awareness, that's the first step. Self-regulation is the second step. And as you just said, you've got to be able to respond and not react when it comes to that point. So that's what we're going to talk about here today, because that's going to lead us right into motivation. That's where we want to go with this. But you got to have that self-awareness and self-regulation in place before you can move into motivation.
Yeah, and we talked about specifically of self-regulation. We talked about it, actually an example in the last 2 podcasts, but specifically the last one, where an effect of a negative emotional event, if you're not aware of it and you don't self-regulate properly, say, for example, somebody cuts you off in traffic on the way there, and they're screaming and cussing, you're screaming and cussing, you get to work, you're wound up. It can take up to 4 hours to get back into a solid, focused, productive state after reacting to a highly negative emotion.
Because they did not regulate that emotion.
Correct. And think about this. It only takes one time on the way to work and one poor interaction with a coworker. You got 2 of these in a day, you're 8 hours a shot. How much real productive work are you doing?
Not to mention the impact it has on other people that you're interacting with in your organization.
And then if you look at across your team or across your organization, it ripples effect to them. And then it's a little bit less, but still a negative effect on them. How does that affect your productivity and your efficiency throughout your whole organization?
Absolutely.
Simply because of a bad. So the self-regulation can't be stressed enough. But you're right. That self-regulation leads to improved motivation. And the motivation is what we're going to talk about today.
Yes.
And with that, we're not talking about carrot and stick type of motivation. We're not, hey, if I pay my folks $1 an hour more, they're going to work a lot harder. To a certain extent, people, obviously you have to be, just go back to, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, there are certain things that need to be met. You can't go into some nirvana of self-actualization if you can't pay the electric bill. right? If you're worried about whether they're going to shut off the gas, you can't really worry about, hey, I really want to, do something that really just fulfills me spiritually or, emotionally. Not so much. So if you take those carrot and stick type things off the table, we want to talk about a level of what we call emotional motivation and really talk about intrinsic motivation, but we have a working definition of it. And I'd like to kind of go back to the notes and share that with the listeners if we can. So what we're talking about here with motivation, it's a passion for work for reasons that go beyond the external drive for things like knowledge or utility or surroundings or how you interact with others or power or methodologies. And they're based on that internal drive or propensity to pursue goals with energy and persistence. So there's other things that I talked about: knowledge, utility, surroundings, others, power, methodology. Those are 6 different motivators that Edward Spranger talked about in the 20s. And there's been a lot of research on it. And there's, some different assessment tools that identify these on a continuum as driving forces that really get people going and motivate them. How they deal with tasks, how they deal with others, how they deal with their time and their thirst for knowledge, or being a more instinctual type of gut instinct kind of person. Take all of that stuff out of it. This is a deeper level. This is a deeper type of, like you said, almost an emotional motivation. It's just a truly intrinsic one that really just, a good way to put it talks about here is like I said, it's a passion to work for reasons. Like I said, it goes beyond money, goes beyond status. And it's just a propensity to pursue goals with a higher level of understanding that the emotional value of one's activity is what's important. So you're doing it for you. You've got this, like I said, this burning internal drive to do a good job, to achieve something, to make something happen.
Dave, a great example we can look at is that movie, Chariots of Fire, that fantastic movie that won so many awards back in the day. In that movie, in one of the scenes, one of the Olympic runners, falls down at the beginning of the race.
Right.
Looks like he's going to be out of the race. No chance in finishing the race, let alone winning the race. No, he gets back up and starts to pursue that person that's at the front of the pack with this drive, persistence. And this is going on way beyond anything else. It's for him personally. He, at the last second, gets ahead of the guy at the finish line and breaks the string. That's a great example of how someone operates on something that goes beyond the basic motivations. That was an internal drive that this guy had, and he just had to win at all costs just because of his self-esteem and what he thought of himself. That's what was at stake.
Yeah. And then this isn't, I'm trying to win for somebody else, or I'm trying to, prove something to my wife, my girlfriend, my daddy, my boyfriend, my cousin, whatever. This isn't proving something to somebody else. This is internal. This is for you. This is pure, raw, intrinsic motivation. Exactly. And that's a great example of that. It's kind of like here. I mean, it talks about it's categorized within self, internal, or intrinsic motivation. It talks about it's really the most powerful form of a driver for performance. This is something, if you have that internal drive, these are the things that, why people stay late. This is why people, work hard to do things. Especially for entrepreneurs, they're motivated, they have that drive. You're like, why are you doing this? This makes no sense. I mean, why are you? It's just part of their DNA, it seems like. It's part of their drive. But if they're not self-aware and they can't regulate their emotions, the problem is, like you said, it's hard to stay on task and stay focused. And so you might have a high level of intrinsic motivation, but if you can't stay focused or on task, you're not going to stay motivated for a while, because you're not going to be achieving and accomplishing and moving the ball down the field.
Yeah, you're not going to do what it takes to get ahead. You're not going to do what it takes to really succeed. And you're just going to succumb to any pressures, outside pressures, or disappointments. So again, regulating yourself to the point where you're motivated to accomplish those things that are